On a Saturday afternoon in 1957, John Lennon, age 16, meets Paul McCartney, age 15, at a garden fete at St. Peter's Church in Liverpool. The meeting day is miraculously captured in a photo. John's skiffle band, the Quarrymen, were playing the event. The bassist, Ivan Vaughan, invites Paul, who impresses John with his rendition of Bebop a Lula during the band's break. Additionally, John is impressed with Paul's ability to tune a guitar. John invites Paul to join the Quarrymen, and Paul eventually agrees. The Quarrymen get new matching suits and begin playing social events throughout Liverpool and the surrounding area over the next year and a half, fine-tuning their ragged sound. During this period, George Harrison attaches himself to Paul on the bus ride to school and soon joins the Quarrymen at Paul's insistence, despite John thinking he was too young, having just turned 15. The Quarrymen appear on a show TV Star Search and end up losing, but they qualify for the regional finals in Manchester. Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, with Ringo Starr on drums, finishes second out of 150 bands. A disagreement on the bus ride home results in the drummer, Colin Hanton, leaving the band. He is later replaced by Pete Best. This is truly the year the Beatles begin to formulate their look and distinctive sound that will shoot them into the stratosphere. John Lennon's art school friend, Stuart Sutcliffe, sells a painting for $180 and buys a bass guitar to join the band, renaming them the Beatles. Their manager at the time, a coffeehouse owner, gets them a gig in Hamburg, Germany, renaming them to the Silver Beatles in the process. Silver Beatles head to Germany's red light district in Hamburg to play the Indra Club, while sleeping in the small room of a movie house across the street with no heat. It is in this 7-week stint they play 105 consecutive nights without any nights off. They play 4.5 hours a day on weekdays and 6 hours a night on weekends. Another band playing in Hamburg is Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, where they meet the band's drummer, Ringo Starr. They begin to develop their take on Merseybeat, a sound that originated around the Mersey area of Liverpool. The sound referred to as Merseybeat is a take on American rock and roll. In Hamburg, they meet artist Klaus Voormann, who brings his photographer girlfriend to their show, Astrid Kircher. They all become fast friends, and she reworks their look to a tougher, cooler style with black leather jackets and new haircuts. She takes iconic photos of the Beatles during this time. The Beatles begin to play at a rival club, the Top 10, where they continue to develop an explosive stage presence and sound. The original club owner they are under obligation to play for is furious and has Paul and Pete arrested for arson and George deported for being underage. Smitten with Stuart, Astrid ends her relationship with Klaus and later becomes engaged to Stuart when he leaves the band to stay behind and live with her. Later on in 1962, Stuart develops a brain hemorrhage and tragically dies at just 21 years old. The Beatles return to Liverpool with a new stage presence and sound that creates furious excitement in local young people. They become the Cavern Club's most beloved band, and a buzz about the Beatles begins. When they are booked to play the Cavern Club, audiences begin to line up around the corner and down 18 stone steps into a dark, sweaty room where the MC greets with, "Hi all our cavern dwellers, welcome to the best of sellers." Just a mile from the Cavern Club is a local record shop, the North End Music Store, where someone asked the shop owner if he stocks a record, My Bonnie, which he did not. The 27-year-old shopkeeper is Brian Epstein, who wants to find out more about this record that everyone is asking for. Epstein drops in the Cavern Club on a fateful autumn night. On November 9th, 1961, Brian Epstein describes the first encounter at the Cavern as a black, deep grave where he sees and hears a captivating and honest band play. He offers to manage them, and for 25%, he will get them better gigs and more money. From that moment on, he will spend most of his life working on their behalf. Brian's first priority is to get the Beatles a record deal. However, no one wanted them. On New Year's Day 1962, the Beatles drove 10 hours to London in a fierce snowstorm to audition for Decca Records, and were rejected in what has gone down as one of the greatest mistakes in the history of the music industry. Decca tells Epstein guitar groups are on their way out. They are also rejected by Columbia, Pi, and Philips. Later, Brian is referred to a subsidiary of EMI, where he met with George Martin of Parlophone Records. Martin agrees to proceed with the recording session, but with one condition: Pete Best will not play. This angers the loyal Liverpool fans, and some even vandalise Brian's car. Best's replacement is a friend they had met in Hamburg, who had been perfecting the Merseybeat while also playing there. On September 11, 1962, the Beatles, with Ringo Starr on drums, record Love Me Do in the studio. The song hits UK charts at number 49. At 10 a.m. on February 11, 1963, the Beatles entered EMI Studios and recorded their entire first album by 10:45 p.m. Martin put the final touches to Please Please Me, saying, "Gentlemen, you've just made your first number one," and he is proven right. Their first album, Please Please Me, is released in the UK on March 22nd. By October, they have been making many TV appearances when they appeared on a British show called Sunday Night at the London Palladium to an audience of 15 million viewers who witnessed the live audience become so excited and unruly that John finally shouts, "Shut up!" A new term is coined to describe this new phenomena known as Beatlemania. From this point on, every concert is met with screaming fans who try to rush the stage. An American who is in the business of sniffing out the next big thing witnesses them getting rushed at Heathrow Airport and is curious to find out who is causing the ruckus, and it turns out to be Ed Sullivan, who books them on his show soon after. In November, they charm the royals at the Royal Command performance when John gets a big laugh when tells the audience to clap, while the rest can just rattle their jewellery. By the end of the year, they are prisoners of their own fame. The album with the Beatles is released November 22nd. February 7th, 4 working-class kids made their way across the Atlantic on Pan Am Flight 101 to Kennedy Airport, where they were met by 3,000 hysterical fans as their song I Want to Hold Your Hand hit number 1 that same day. February 9th, a record-breaking 73 million people watched them on The Ed Sullivan Show. February 11th, their first US concert in the US in Washington, D.C. is held to 7,000 screaming fans. The Washington Post describes them as asexual and homely. Their long hair offends many who think they need haircuts. But most young people fall in love with their style, their sense of humour and their music. March 2nd, they begin shooting A Hard Day's Night where they run from their fans. During the filming, George meets Pattie Boyd, who is an extra in the film and will later become the muse for some of the Beatles' greatest love songs. The album, A Hard Day's Night, is released July 10th. Then just 5 months later, on December 4th, they release Beatles for Sale. They begin to work on a follow-up film, Help, and this time gives each member more of an individual identity. During the filming of the movie, Paul is working out a song he had during a dream which drives the director, Richard Lester, crazy after hearing it on the piano so many times. The song ends up being yesterday changed from its original title, Scrambled Eggs. In August, a concert at Shea Stadium in New York breaks attendance records at 55,000. During this time, they meet Elvis at his home in LA. They also release the album Help on August 6th. Queen Elizabeth II appoints each of the Beatles a member of the British Empire, MBE. Heavily influenced by Bob Dylan's folk sound, they release Rubber Soul on December 3rd, which takes pop music to a new level, featuring George Harrison's Norwegian Wood, where he begins experimenting with the sitar and Eastern influences. Times begin to get more tense around the world, and with the Beatles, the constant go and pressure begins to get to them. In June, they have a concert in the Philippines and get manhandled by the police when they refuse to attend an event they were unaware of on their day off with Imelda Marcos. Then in August, an English reporter released a private statement John had made earlier to her saying that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. Taken out of context, the backlash for the observation is immense and immediate, especially in the South, where there were record burnings and they were banned from being played on 13 radio stations. John apologizes and tries to explain what he meant in many interviews thereafter. That same month, the album Revolver is released on August 5th. On tour, they receive death threats in Memphis. When a firecracker goes off, they think they are being shot at. In Cincinnati, they refuse to play electric guitars during a rainstorm without a canopy. In Los Angeles, cops are caught beating up teenage fans and dozens get trampled in the chaos. The final stop is at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, where the Beatles are unable to be heard due to screaming fans. Brian remarks, "This will be the last one. This is a period of sublime creativity in the studio." John brings in a song to Abbey Road Studios he has been working on, and George Martin likes it so much they record 2 versions. He splices it up with one part of the first and another part of the other, creating one of the most innovative tracks of the time, A Day in the Life. Paul plays Penny Lane for Martin, and they begin experimenting with symphonies and orchestras for the first time. Martin will later call it the best record we ever made. June 1st, as the Beatles assemble the songs for their new album, they discover inspiration everywhere around them and begin experimenting heavily with different sounds and visuals. Paul comes up with the idea to make a concept album in which Sgt. Pepper is making the album. They experiment with sounds including Victorian steam organs and roosters. The cover art is the most elaborate of its time, with dozens of celebrities in the backdrop requiring extensive legal releases. The album is released on May 26th. right as The Summer of Love takes off and is an instant hit worldwide, considered one of the greatest albums of all time. Paul sums up the success with the following statement: "There aren't as many barriers as we'd thought." In August, the Beatles and their wives spend the weekend with meditation guru Maharishi in Wales. Shortly after arriving, they get a call that Brian is found dead from mixing alcohol with sleeping pills. With no manager to keep things in order, they begin to make business ventures with their new company. Apple, such as a short-lived boutique, and a record company to find talented artists who need help, and an electronics division. During this period, Paul gets another idea from Ken Kesey's Merry Pranksters about a psychedelic bus that drives around while they create another concept album and film. The album is released in November and peaks at number 1, and then is followed by the Magical Mystery Tour film, which is released close to Christmas but is panned by critics. The band with their wives and other musicians travels to Rishikesh, India to continue their meditation journey. While there, they begin to write songs and develop several songs with a more natural acoustic sound. Under contractual obligation, they agree to an animated film in which they contribute 4 songs but little else. Not even their voices are used. The film's premiere is in July, and to everyone's surprise, it is adored. Yellow Submarine is considered delightful, an instant classic. They then begin recording their next album, often with friction and disconnect, sometimes recording their parts at different times, avoiding one another. In August, Ringo can't take it anymore and announces he is quitting the band. They each call him and talk him into coming back. When he returns to the studio, his drum kit is covered in flowers. On November 22nd, the White Album is released, which includes several songs from their time in India. In January, Yellow Submarine, the album, is released. A pivotal year in Beatles history. In 1969, both Paul and John get married. Paul marries girlfriend Linda Eastman on March 12th. Then just 8 days later, on March 20th, John marries Yoko Ono, who he has become inseparable from for the last year. A long list of publicity stunts followed John and Yoko's wedding, including a bed-in at the Amsterdam Hilton, appearing at the Royal Albert Hall in bags, releasing 365 helium balloons over London. John explains he is protesting against all the suffering and violence in the world. The change in John's behaviour and the public antics leave the other 3 Beatles less than impressed, especially when Yoko brings a mattress into the studio while they are recording. John can't seem to understand what the big deal is. Paul and George are filmed having a disagreement while recording at Twickenham Studios, which causes George to want to leave the band. In an attempt to liven things up and save the Beatles, Paul suggests they do a concert for their next album. Different ideas are floated when they finally agree to a jam session on the roof of Apple Studios. They finish recording the album Let It Be on the same day, but it is deemed unworthy to release and is shelved for the moment. The band then begins working on their last studio album, which many think will probably be their last. They are all in great spirits, recording some of their finest work, including George's Something and Here Comes the Sun, John's Come Together, and a slew of Paul's melodies. The album is released September 26th and goes on to be considered their masterpiece by many. In one of the most iconic album covers of all time, an image selected by McCartney, the band walk across the street in single file from left to right. McCartney is barefoot and out of step with the others. Except for Harrison, the group are wearing suits designed by Tommy Nutter. The image rejuvenates the Paul is dead rumour. The image of the Beatles on the Abbey Road crossing has become one of the most famous and imitated in recording history. In December 2010, the crossing was given Grade 2, listed status for its cultural and historical importance. After several intense disagreements, John announces that he wants a divorce. No official announcement is made at the time, as they each begin working on independent projects. Then finally, Paul releases a statement on April 10th announcing the breakup. The once scrapped recordings of Let It Be are released in May as news of the breakup has stunned the world. The album's title track, The Long and Winding Road, hits number 1 in the US. On December 31st, McCartney files a lawsuit against the other 3 Beatles in London's High Court of Justice for dissolution of the band's contractual partnership. The formal dissolution of the partnership took place in London on January 9th, 1975. Fans never stopped asking each member of the band if there was any possibility of a reunion. They never gave up until Lennon's death in 1980, which devastated the world.